So I'm going to watch. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, I'm Rachel Poisky, a Duchenne mom. I have a 20-year-old, Joel, with Duchenne. And this panel, all these professional Duchenne professionals up here, we are talking about accepting help. And I just think about, Dr. Kozar, what you were talking about with connectedness, and accepting help is part of that. Figuring out who's in your circle, who can you trust, who can support you. And I think accepting help is really an acquired skill. I don't know if you have this experience, but since my son's been using a wheelchair more, I'm always like, I have to protect my back. I have to protect my back. Well, I think we also have to protect our emotional and our mental health as well, because Duchenne is a long journey, and we need to figure out ways that we can continue to hone this skill. Accepting help is a skill, and caregiver burnout is real. Can we all say that? Caregiver burnout is real. And so that's why we need to be thinking about, even from the beginning of our diagnosis, how are we learning how to accept help? I worked a lot on helping my son advocate for himself, and I wish from diagnosis that I'd worked on how to accept help and started in little ways. But I had a crash course about 8 weeks ago when my son fell and broke both of his legs, and we found ourselves in the hospital, and the ambulance took us to an adult hospital. If you've never had an adult hospital treating a pediatric disease, it is difficult, because every single person that comes into that room, you are educating them. This is what Duchenne is. They can't have this. They can't have that. And I was completely exhausted. I could not make another decision fatigue. My husband and I were just constantly trying to help them understand how to manage these broken legs. And my friend texted me and she said, "Do you want a meal train?" And I was like, "I don't know. I probably don't need one." I mean, And she said, "Do you need a meal train?" I'm like, "No." And then she said, "I'm going to make the decision for you." And I was like, "Yes." And so she got a meal train for 6 weeks, which was great. But that helped me understand, yes, I need to accept help. So we have some people up here who are going to talk a little bit as well about their journey of accepting help. And I want to start with Betty. I'm going to start with you. And Betty, I'm going to let you just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what has your journey been like of accepting help.
Okay, my name is Betty. I'm from Hastings, Nebraska. I have 7 children, aging in range from 17 months to 22 years old, and 3 of them are boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I don't know, maybe not boys, they're turning into young men. They are 12, 14, and 17. They were diagnosed about, I think it's been 13 years ago. So we've learned a lot in that amount of time, like starting out with very independent boys and not knowing anything about Duchenne to now 2 of the boys are non-ambulatory. Our second son fell just earlier this year and broke his femur and has not been walking. So that's been a learning experience, just going from one son, a non-ambulatory in a power chair, to 2. It doubled our work that we do as caregivers. It doubled how much we're lifting, how many transfers, how many kids were getting dressed in the morning. I mean, it just really changed and flipped our world upside down. And so we've been learning a lot in the last 6 months how to accept help, because we are outnumbered. I mean, there are 2 of us, me and my husband, Jason, and I couldn't do it without his help. And to be a team has been really important as part of our journey, because we are outnumbered. 3 boys, 2 parents, and there are 4 other children in our house. So we've really learned how to divide and conquer, but we've needed to invite other people into our house for the first time for extra help caring for the boys. It hasn't been easy on us or the boys. I was telling Joanna earlier, we have someone come over on Wednesdays just for 2 hours and they hate her. And they go in their rooms and they shut the door and they don't interact with her at all. But when she's here and they're ignoring her, she does fold all my laundry and she's been sweeping and mopping, and so that's a win.
What's her name?
And so that was one thing I wanted to say is help doesn't always look like what you expect it to look like in the beginning, but help is help, and it's really a blessing and about the only way we can muddle through this journey.
Yeah, that's great. And I like what you said too, because I think sometimes we immediately go to caregivers, which we want to talk about that in a second, but sometimes we know some of our kiddos can be a little particular, and that's a hard move, but that you can get other things done. It doesn't just have to be, it doesn't just have to be help with them, but other things that also can help you. And so maybe that's even a good first step. If someone's like, I'm not quite sure I'm ready for someone else to be my son's caregiver, daughter's caregiver, maybe that's a first step. But Joanna, I know you actually have had some good experience with caregivers and things like that. Can you kind of demystify that for us a little bit?
Sure. It's a funny story how, when I talk about accepting help early and how important that is, and sometimes you accept help at a complete moment of weakness, and I don't know if everybody else has the same experience, but when you go to clinic and the social worker comes in and your kids are young, you're just annoyed. I'm like, oh, what do you have for me? Do you have a cure? Do you have a treatment? No, you don't. Okay, thank you, get out. Like I'm so, that's all I care about. And then, funny enough, it was when Elliot broke his leg, and the social worker, I don't know why she was even there that day, she came in and she's like, can I help? And I went, yeah, we're fine. No, we're not fine. I was like, we need help now. I said, nobody's sleeping. I said, and I just probably was crying hysterically. My sons are here. You can ask them how I was that day anyway. They have some good funny stories about me yelling and crying, and at that point she said to me, okay. And we're lucky, and I wish I could say for everybody in this room that you qualify for the same type of help. We were lucky in Pennsylvania to qualify. Within a couple months, we had overnight help, and it was a game changer. Just to be able to get a full night's sleep. We're better parents because of them. I have a lot more, not all the time, but I think we both have a lot more patience, and we say all the time that it's, invaluable. We got very lucky with one overnight aide we've had for years now, who's like a member of our family. I always tell her, we got an extra room upstairs, the bathroom, it's all yours. You can come and live with us forever. But and it's just, the key with that was, it wasn't easy, and the boys didn't, in the beginning, they weren't crazy about someone else helping them, and it took some time, but the fact that they were young, I think Elliot was in 8th grade and Henry was in 6th grade, it just made all the difference, and we've been using it since then. It's not fun having someone in your home. Our overnight aide, she's different. We sit and chit chat all the time. Paul will tell you that, he's like, all right, her shift's done, she can go home now. But, and they don't love it, but it's not easy having someone in your house all the time. But just to have, we have someone now, we have 4 hours a day. She comes after school. In the summertime, she comes, during the day. It enables me to go out and run an errand or go out to lunch with a friend or, do anything like that. It's just, it's not easy, but it's essential for your own well-being. And, eventually our boys are gonna need help. I said boys, our young men, whatever, they're gonna need help. And it can't always be us, and they have to get used to other people helping them out. So that's my experience.
Yeah. That's great. And I think just acknowledging, it's not necessarily the way a natural family life is set up, but you kind of have to, create a new normal and say, okay, this is our new normal, so that we can be more normal in the way we feel and get some sleep and things like that.
And it's like at one point, I think, Elliot and Henry want things, Elliot especially, sorry, he's probably listening. He's like, would you stop complaining about me? But he wants things when he wants it. And it was, he didn't want anybody else to shower him. And I said, look, Melanie's there for X amount of hours. She'll do it. And he was like, okay, fine. And then he got used to someone else showering him. So it's just like all those little things just make a big difference in the end.
Yeah, and maybe starting some things earlier, I think that's...
Exactly. I mean, I think that's how we benefited. They were young. I mean, they were 6th and 8th grade. So I think they're used to it now. It's just kind of part of their lives.
Yeah. So, Adith, tell us a little bit about how you're functioning independently at school and just how you navigate caregivers and things like that.
Sure. So my name is Adith. I'm 25 years old, living with Duchenne. And, you know, when I first started needing caregivers, when I thought about going away to college. So I went to college at University of Maryland, College Park, which is a 2-hour drive away from home. And at that point, I knew I wanted to live on campus, and I didn't want either of my parents moving with me. That was out of the question, because I wanted to experience college life away from my parents. But in order to get ready for that, a couple of months leading up to college, I had a caregiver start coming in for a couple of hours during the day, and just to sort of practice what it would be like. And when I was in college, I had caregivers overnight, but I was pretty independent during the day. And the way I was able to achieve that is there's people out there who are willing to help with little things, like holding the door open for you, carrying my lunch tray in the cafeteria, the way we had to get rid of our lunch plates and trays. It was on this conveyor belt that was elevated, and I couldn't reach it. And I, started to think, oh, do I need a caregiver to come with me and help me with this? And the answer was no, because there's plenty of students going in and out every day who are more than happy to lend a hand. And when you're looking at caregivers, getting help isn't only from the caregivers. You can get help from anyone. Strangers, good Samaritans, your friends. I actually have a story from college where my chair ran out of battery at the bottom of a really tall hill. So I called 2 of my friends, and they rushed over from the other side of campus. They got ropes, they tied them to the tie-downs on my chair, and they pulled me up that hill.
And your parents were terrified that insurance was not going to cover repairs at that point.
Well, I told my parents this after the fact.
After
I got safely home.
That's always a good idea.
By the way, that's what you always do in college. You tell them after.
That's a typical college response.
Yeah.
But it's all about knowing what it is you need and being able to figure out who can fill in those gaps, whether it's a caregiver or whether it's friends, whether it's family members, and just becoming comfortable with the idea of asking for help. Just because you ask for help doesn't mean you're weak or any less independent. And I think that's the idea I had to come to terms with. I'm very independent. I like to do things myself, just ask my parents. And the idea of asking somebody else for help, there was a mental barrier there. And it was a mental barrier that I kind of created for myself because, I was losing some abilities that I had, and I didn't want to lose any more. And I was like, okay, I have to be as independent as possible, even if it's hard for me, even if it's tiring. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So within me, I had to go through a sort of mental struggle within myself and realize that it's okay to ask for help. And there's people out there willing to help. It's just a matter of they don't know how they can help. And if you're able to, as a person with Duchenne or any other disability, if you're able to direct your caregivers and even strangers, even Good Samaritans, just tell them how it is they can help you best, people are more than willing to help out. And I also, for a couple of months after I graduated college during COVID, I actually moved a couple of states away. So I'm from Maryland, and I moved to Wisconsin to work for Epic Systems, the electronic medical record company. And it was a very different experience from living away in college, because I knew in college, if anything ever went wrong, my parents were a 2-hour drive away. That wasn't the case when I moved to a completely different state. And I had to rely a lot more on my caregivers. And I went from just overnight care to pretty much 24/7 care. And it was weird having somebody else in my apartment with me all the time. It was weird, going to the grocery store with someone else. It was doing all those errands that I used to, go with my mom for, or my dad for. Having a caregiver do all of that, it was another transition. And, it made me feel less independent in some cases, just because I never needed round-the-clock care. And even now that I'm back home in Maryland, I only have overnight care. But for me, it was all about getting comfortable with just relying on somebody else other than my parents. Some of the other issues that people can encounter are just articulating how you need help. And a way that I sort of got around that is I would have either one of my parents or a very trusted caregiver show new caregivers my routine. And the first night they come in, they would just observe. They would watch how I did things with another caregiver and just observe, ask questions, because lots of people are visual learners. And that can also get rid of some of the confusion of if you're not quite able to articulate what sort of help you need or how people can help you best.
That's great. And I just love how you had to find your voice to make it happen and to direct it, and that ultimately gave you more independence.
Yeah.
Asking for help gives you more independence.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So Susan, our grandparent on the panel, I would just love to hear your perspective as offering support. Kind of tell us what your experience has been and what you want these parents to know and individuals with Duchenne to know about that.
Sure. So what was interesting, Adith, when you talked about having to kind of overcome the mental challenge of asking for help and that sort of thing, I think everybody can relate to that. Because it's really hard to be vulnerable. But the one thing I will say is, for family and friends, allowing them to help you, you're blessing them more than they're probably going to even help you. Because so many people do want to be a part. They want to feel like they've done something to lessen a burden a little bit or that type of thing. And so it's really, really important, if it can be done in a healthy way, with family and friends, to be able to do that. And I know in our family, my number one goal is to be my daughter's mom, my son-in-law's mother-in-law, and my grandson's grandma. There's nothing more important than that. However, I want to be able to help them in ways that I'm able to help them. And so our relationship is always first. So if I get a little ahead, and that happens, and I can tell my daughter or son-in-law are like, ooh, I have to pull back. And that's not easy for me, but I have to pull back because they are the parent, they are the ones who are in charge, and I am there to help them. I am not there to tell them how to do it. I'm not going to say I don't do that, but I try not to. And so, you know, it's definitely, it can be challenging. Fortunately, we have a very positive, we've figured out how to make it work, and it's worked very, very well for us. And then I also consider one of the primary things I need to do is just encourage them. And remind them that, you know, everything you're doing, nothing you're doing is typical. And we had seen a neuropsychologist once, and she talked about Hunter, and she said, everything about Hunter is complex. And his is from a because neurology, the way his brain functions, along with the physical, et cetera, its behaviors, et cetera. And it was actually, as much as I hate that word, it nailed it. Finally, we had a word because everything is complex. So, you know, my hope is to be able to just walk alongside them and be able to help them with things that they may need. And then what's interesting as a grandparent, I needed help also. Like, I needed to have something to do because I felt 100% helpless. Like, I did not know if there was any way I could ever make an impact or you know, I don't know. I was so heartbroken and wanted so bad to fix it, and I can't fix any of it. But, you know, I ended up getting connected with PPMD, do advocacy on the state and federal level. I'm a coordinator. I help my daughter with some of the research, again, because I want her to be able to be the parent, not have to worry about all that mishmash. And then I did start, not just myself, but a group of us started a not-for-profit in Nebraska for families that have children or young adults with Duchenne, where, you know, we can just, again, walk alongside of them. You need a stander in your chair and insurance won't cover it, call Hunter's Hope, and we will do whatever we can to try to make that happen. And then I'm having to ask for help of raising money and that type of thing. So it's a kind of a big circle.
Yeah. Yeah, but what I love about that, again, is sometimes we think about caregiving as only the physical caregiving of the person with Duchenne, but you're taking some loads other places that really help and support the family. And I know every parent with Duchenne wants to do every advocacy thing, you know, and do all these things, research, and they're exhausted at the end of the day. And so when they feel like that someone else is helping with that, that's really great.
This is a disease, you cannot manage this alone. I mean, you just get that off your plate. You can't. It's impossible. Like it's just impossible. It's not a one parent, even two parents. It's as much help as you can get because you're going to need it.
Yeah, that's a really good word, Joanna. Well, Betty, I was wondering about how did you kind of know what was your breaking point that said, I have to get help? How did you recognize that in yourself and in your family, that this was the point where I needed it?
Well, somebody this morning asked me, at what numbered kid did you lose your sanity? And I think it happened around 4 or 5. So maybe that was when I knew. No, just kidding. I love all my children. They're really fun. Honestly, in the last year has been a big change because both boys, the two older boys have both lost ambulation. And early on, there was a period of like in a month where I hurt my back twice. Like nothing horrible, but like it sore, and I couldn't lift. I had to wait for Jason to come and do it, and I just didn't like that. And I knew it was because I'd been doing too much. Like my body told me, like you can't do this. Like, and part of it is when the boys are diagnosed, and probably a lot for all of us, we're pretty young. We're like in our 20s or 30s, and our bodies are capable of doing more than they are now. And because I'm 43, and just doing the amount of lifting was more than my back could handle. So getting other people in the house that could help do some of the lifting was probably the biggest motivator for me. And then that gave me time to kind of recover and strengthen my core so that hopefully it doesn't happen again, or at least as often as it had been.
That's good. Adith, I know one thing that I think some people have on their mind when they think about getting help in terms of paid caregivers and things like that is, one, finding good ones, two, having to fire bad ones, and just having a shortage. And so I know there's probably some people out there saying, it sounds great, but it sounds one more thing on my plate to manage. So have you had any experience with some of those things, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, so I've both hired caregivers on my own and also gone through an agency, just because that's how things work in Maryland, as far as getting caregivers and having the state pay for your hours. But my first year of college, I actually hired students on campus to help out. And I looked for students with sort of like a health-ish background. So the University of Maryland, the campus I was at, didn't have a PT school or a nursing program or a medical school or anything like that. So I actually went to the kinesiology department, sports science, and I found out that a lot of those students need to have sort of one-on-one time where they actually work with, anyone, people who have had a sports-related injury or, people with a disability. And so when I was searching for caregivers, I basically put up flyers at the Career Center at the university. I sent it to Career Services. They sent out an email blast. And I even went to the kinesiology department to find caregivers and people who sort of knew, what it would entail, helping someone, because they study, how people recover after injury, after sports injury, regular injury, things like that. So I was blessed that I had a couple of good caregivers that way. And through, once I started using an agency to hire, which is also what I did in Wisconsin, I have been very lucky to always have an excellent caregiver. Some of them were, hit or miss, but my caregiving team has always had one or two really excellent people who I really get along with, and they become almost like friends to me. And so I know I can call them in a pinch. I know they're willing to help, but that's definitely something to sort of navigate once you get to the point where you or your kids are start to need more care, and paying for it is definitely a struggle. Once it goes from like just 2 or 3 hours a day to 12 hours a day, it becomes a lot. And so using those state resources, sometimes your hands get tied because it's what the state says. And I've been lucky that those I've hired through an agency have been great, and I haven't really had to fire anyone. I've had to switch agencies for different reasons, but I know not everyone is going to have that experience, but when you're looking at like professional caregivers, first things first, it's a job. You're their employer, they're your employee. That's the relationship first. And sometimes, yes, you can become friendly with them, but don't become super friendly if they're not a good fit, or you start to feel that they aren't a good fit. And make sure that they know, the first relationship you have with them is employer-employee. And if they're not quite fulfilling their obligations or what you expect from them, sit down and have a talk with them. You don't have to jump immediately to, oh, this isn't working, we need to move on. Sit down, talk with them, express your concerns, and work with them to sort of get the care that you need in the way that you need it.
That's good. Joanna, what about you? I know you've had a lot of experiences with caregivers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so my son Elliot is a freshman in college. He lives on campus. It's about an hour and 10 minutes away. We were lucky again in the state of Pennsylvania to qualify for 24/7 aides, but I mean, unfortunately, the situation is pretty bleak throughout the country to try and find them. As we all know, it's an incredibly important job. It's an incredibly valued job, but unfortunately, it's a horribly paid job. So Adith makes a good point. One of the ways that we were able to find people was there's a brand new nursing school where he attends. There's also a PT program. There's exercise kinesiology, however you say that. Anyway, I'm a Spanish teacher. I don't know science so well, except for Duchenne. But and we were able to recruit students through that, and that they have been, some of the most consistent, and people that we have had throughout the year. And whereas as now that Elliot's finished his first year there, it's a small school. We've been able to make more inroads and hire more students that way. But again, it's complicated. It's possible. You need to act early and fast, or as early as you can. We work currently now for Elliot with 2 different agencies. It's about to be 3 different agencies, which seemed daunting at the time, but it's just kind of how you get things done. I wish I had better information to say that, it's easy to get them, but it's not. So I think you just have to, set your net out wide. I can tell some funny stories. When I was in panic mode last summer, I contacted local prisons in the area. Not kidding, because I thought, and Paul said
This is supposed to be uplifting.
Yeah.
Good job.
No, that's what I said. And Paul said, "What are you, nuts?" And I said, "I believe in rehabilitation. Everybody needs jobs. I'm sure they're not going to pick like a hardened criminal. I'm like, maybe they just made like some bad mistakes." It didn't work, but they were. So I tried.
I feel like we should put a disclaimer on this panel now.
We didn't end up hiring anyone that way, but we just tried our best to, put out as many feelers as possible. We ended up, lucky enough, there's a mom with, Duchenne who they live outside of where Elliot went to school, and one of her sons had graduated from college, and he was an aide for Elliot for a bit, friend of a friend. It's possible, it's not easy, and I think, but anybody wants to talk to me about it. And again, I wish I had a solution that I could say would qualify for everyone in every state of the country, but it doesn't work that way. I talked a lot with someone in Massachusetts, and the situation's different on how people are hired and whatnot. Again, in Pennsylvania, you mostly have to work through agencies. You have to. There's no, up until, and that's a whole other story, but up until they're 21, you have to work with an agency. So we found people and we feed them to the agency. So.
And I think that is really important. What state you're in can really affect how easy it is to find someone.
Right.
Don't move to Texas. Did I say that out loud? But there's a struggle here. And wait lists for 17 years
horrible.
And things like that.
That just makes me sick when I hear
but
stuff
to
like
know
that.
your state's resources, and I know, Susan, you've kind of done some of that. And how do you encourage people, how do you say, what are some good steps to go about finding not just your state resources, but organizations and things like that that can help you?
So, the prison thing, I'm still a little, still just back on that. Like, I think I'm creative, but no, I would never have thought of that one. But back to that, like, so Betty and I are both from Nebraska, so not a huge populated state, and if you're not probably in the bigger cities, I know some of our families have really struggled with finding help. And I don't know what an answer is for that as far as people coming into your home, but other resources for help. And this is hard. It's really hard to put it in an application and say, we need some financial assistance for this or that or whatever it may be. But I highly encourage people to be creative as you look in that. Look at your Kiwanis, look at your Elks clubs, look at your Lions clubs. The Duchenne Assistance Program, the JET Foundation. Sometimes when you need some resources to get you through, it's not easy to do that. But again, like with Hunter's Hope, and we're focused on Nebraska, but we have people who they are wanting to help. They're not giving money because they are like, oh, these people are this, that, or the other thing. They're giving money because their heart hurts, and they know they can only do so much. And this is one thing that they can do to be a part of our lives and to take one little piece of that hardship away.
Yeah.
It's not the whole thing, but it's a little tiny bit.
Yeah.
But it is really a struggle with finding, finding caregivers in certain places. And in Nebraska, it is, I think Texas and Nebraska are somewhat the same as far as what is available for care and some of the processes and the dollars and that. But that is one thing that I don't know if anything will ever come to fruition of what I do, but I'm not just going to sit back and let them roll over us. For me, that is the one thing. I have the time. My daughter doesn't, and most of our families don't. Although we have a great core group of moms who we've all shown up at the Capitol before. We've shown up at different meetings and hearings, and I try to keep information out to our families so that if they want to get involved, they can. But I would never ever pressure them because their plate is full.
Just to piggyback on that, that's where the social worker is. I didn't even think about this, but that was a huge help. Again, throughout, but last year with the AIDS, it was our social worker at Nemours. She said, just give me the list of agencies. And one of the agencies that came through was someone that she had a contact with that I cold called and said, we don't have anybody. And then when she called them, they called me back and was like, oh, we might be able to. So, again, really for those kind of things, the social worker at wherever you get care, even if it's out of state, they're still going to be able to connect you with resources in your own state.
I really like what you said about not just thinking about physical help, but resources and just things that can help the financial burden and the stress of trying to find something that you need. That's really important. And also what you said about connecting with families. I think other Duchenne families. I think sometimes we don't think about other Duchenne families being a source of help, but working together and having, and even with what Dr. Kozar was talking about, having your families connected to each other. I know with my son and his broken legs, I needed to go do something, and I thought, I had no one to keep him, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I called another Duchenne mom, and I said, can I drop him off for an hour? I just need an hour. And she said, of course. And that was great, because I knew someone knew what was happening. If something happened to him in that moment, she could take care of it. So shout out to Erin for that. But I think we need to think about that as a safety net too, because other Duchenne families can be, we can work together and resource each other and help with care at times. So Betty just told me in terms of not paid caregivers or things like that, but what have you asked for help from neighbors, from other family members, and what are things that you found helpful?
Like, what have I asked them to do?
Yeah, like what are some specific things you said, I've reached out for this, or they've reached out to me?
Well, one, and I've thought about this when Susan was talking about her role as a grandparent, my boys love to go to the movies. Like, they love, love, love it. And my mother-in-law will meet them at the movie theater. She'll sit with them and make sure they've had their drink, and if they need anything picked up, dropped. She doesn't have a van, so we meet her there, but she goes to the movies with the boys. That's, like, to us, it's such a gift. Oops. And it's great for the boy and their grandmother to have that special bond. Sometimes, especially when Jason and I just need to be together, not taking care of our children, which we don't do it nearly as often as we should, but we've asked someone to come over and just sit with the boys for 2 hours. 2 hours, that's it. We make sure they've peed and been to the bathroom and they have water bottles and they have their food, and we're leaving for 2 hours. And we go, it's called the Reno. It's about, half a mile from our house. They serve only charcuterie boards and drinks, and we sit there for 2 hours together. And someone at our house has only sat with them, made conversation with them, but not had to actually physically care for them. And that's been really awesome. And then asking the boys to accept help from other people has been huge for us. We have a son who's 14, and he did not want anybody but mom and dad to help him go to the bathroom, to the point where me and my husband were going to school 3 times a day to help him go to the bathroom there. And I just finally said, I can't do that anymore. Can you please let somebody else help you? And he said, okay, which I should have asked him to do that a long time ago. If I knew he was going to say yes so easily. But I would say, those are 3 ways where I've been able to ask and receive, and it's been helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's good, what you're talking about, pushing your son or daughter out of their comfort zone. Say you got to ask for help too. Like I think we sometimes want to be everything to our child, and they have to realize we're human too, and we have limits, and that's showing them as they see us asking for help. Then that teaches them, and that's an example to them, that it's okay to ask for help and you should ask for help, and realizing your own boundaries. And I think that's a great lesson for them to learn. Yeah. Well, I'm not even sure what time it is. I don't have a watch, but how are we? Pretty good?
It's 5:20.
5:20. Okay, so I just want for you guys to take a couple minutes. Anything else you want to say about what you found to be important about asking for help? So Adith, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, so actually just a few examples of, like Joanna and Susan and Betty were saying, help can come from almost unexpected places. Like, for example, talking about the movie thing, my younger brother and I love to go to the movies. And he helps me out at the movies. Like, he can take this tray table on and off. He helps me, like, when my parents are out and we're both at home, he helps me, get lunch together, get dinner together, reach things that I can't reach, put stuff in the microwave for me, things like that. And actually, even earlier today, I was, one of my other sessions for the teen and adult track, one of the doors shut, and so someone else's service dog actually helped me out. So someone saw me struggling, and he told his service dog, go knock that door open, and his service dog went over, pushed the door open for me. So I never expected I would get help from somebody else's service dog, but here we are.
Yeah, that's great. Susan?
Well, the other thing, again, back to kind of being creative, of places to look and find, maybe somebody to come into your home for like the short, give yourself a little break, give yourself a little time. But a lot of times, like churches, you know, they'll have people who really have a servant's heart and want to come and be a part of somebody's family for a very short time, or maybe even co-workers, or you know, organizations that you might be involved with. The asking is very, very hard. But, you know, one of the easy things is go to a place where you think it's going to be safe to ask, obviously.
Yeah.
Because I just see and know so many people that we had a kiddo in Nebraska who the grandpa had to have a surgery, the mom can't move him as well, and I live out in the country, but I have a family I have a friend who lives very close to them. I called my friend and I'm like, can you and Paul go over and help him just each morning and each afternoon? And they were just like, absolutely. Not even thinking twice about it. And there are just so many people that they can do little things, but that little thing means everything to them. And that goes back to the, you know, you're blessing them more than they're even blessing you. And so be creative and keep that in mind.
Yeah, I love it. You know, sometimes churches have respite nights, camp, send your kids to camp. Send your kids to camp, right? Get a week off. But there's a lot of programs like that. There's a lot of just special needs programs, respite nights and things like that out in the community that you can find. And I think that again is another great way for help. Okay, Joanna?
I mean, again, the same kind of ask early, ask often. You know, we're the type of people, I don't know, I think all of us, like, you know, you don't want to ask for help. You made me laugh, Rachel, what you said about your friend. One of my best friends, I've known her forever, she'll always just tell me. Like when Ellie was getting spinal fusion surgery, I'm like, she's like, well, what do you need? And I said, I'm fine. You're not. So I got this whole thing hooked up. I was like, well, you know, she's done more for me than, you know, than I can even talk. But it's nice to, when times are I'm like, no, I think we're good, she just tells me, you're not good, and we're just going to do it anyway. And I know exactly as Susan said, it's a gift to receive the help, you know, as much as it is to, as much as it is to offer the help. So ask early, ask often, use your resources. Don't ever feel like I'm stuck and I'm never going to get help, or this is impossible. I mean, I can't tell you how often, I've called people within my Duchenne family network about anything, and I always, even if they don't have the solution, I always feel better after the conversation. So
yeah, that's good. And I think realizing that some friendships are going to feel unequal, and they're okay with that.
Yep.
And I think we think, well, they did this for me, I should do that for them. And that's not what they're thinking, because their life is not our life, and they want it to be unequal.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And we have to get to that point where our friendships can sometimes be unequal.
yeah.
Betty, thoughts?
I think it doesn't have to be perfect. I think when we first started looking for someone to come into the home, I thought she had to have the perfect personality, and she had to know the perfect jokes, and she had to fit in with the boys just right and not annoy me or Jason. And I was like, it has to be all these things, and it doesn't have to be that. To just come in and be helpful. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be for as long as you wanted or for as many days as you wanted, but take what you can get. I am learning that as I'm going through this, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It can look a lot of different ways, and just take it.
Yeah, that's great. But sometimes if it's not right, you can send them on their way. We had one, she wore so much perfume. I couldn't. I couldn't. I just had to say, I'm sorry, this isn't working out,
Yeah, I get it,
yeah. Well, I think that's about the end of our panel, but I want you all to repeat after me right now. I need help. I want to hear it. I can't hear you. I need help. I need help. That's your mantra. I need help. It's okay. So let's give our panelists just a hand and say thank you.